Chris Lee and Blayne Gilmer of Southeastern 14 here. Georgia starts its season, a 49-3 beatdown of Oregon, ends its season with a 65-7 demolition of TCU. And Blayne Gilmer, the Bulldogs are your NCAA champions for the second year in a row. Congratulations to Georgia.
Truly amazing that, 41-year drought and then now two back-to-back, and then you add in the storylines. Chris, this is a writer's dream, right? Of being able, all the storylines
being done at halftime. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, being done at halftime, but also all the storylines that were leading into it and all the storylines coming out of it. And, it's going to be in terms of college football pundits and things like that. There's so much discussion that's going to go into what does this mean for college football going forward. But tonight, Chris, you and I are here to react to what just took place out in Los Angeles.
Okay, I had several things written down to discuss. I thought the first thing was, look, when it came as 65-7, there's not exactly a lot of big moments to parse, but Georgia's up 17-7. TCU has punted and pinned Georgia back on its 8. And I'm thinking, okay, if there's one chance that TCU has to make it a game, this is it. Say you hold Georgia to a 3-and-out, get a punt, get decent field position, then maybe you're 17-14 with the shot. That is not what happened. Georgia took it 92 yards. Georgia scored touchdowns on every single first half possession except for one in which the Bulldogs got a field goal. That was as dominating a performance as you'll see in a game like this ever.
Chris, even the touchdown drive that Max Duggan ended up running in on, it was set up by busted coverage by Georgia.
Right.
Just totally they left it.
Which, to be fair, TCU had a couple of not their finest moments in execution too, but yes.
Oh, yeah. But what I'm saying is there was nothing in that game, literally nothing in that game other than that busted coverage where TCU had the upper hand at all. Like, it was just sheer domination, like you said, from start to finish. And I wrote in, a piece going into it. I said I felt that this was going to be, it really felt like to me that Ohio State game was more so the national championship than coming into this one. And this was almost going to be like a coronation coming into this one because I thought Georgia would win and cover. And man, it turned out to be way more than cover. Seeing people out there, Chris, and we got the comment by Justin here, says, wow, in the words of Ja Rule, that was murder. So that was, but seeing people out there, Chris, saying, is it time to add the Vegas line, the people who set the lines in Vegas to the college football playoff committee? Because they seem to be pretty accurate.
I think lines of 12.5 for every quarter could have been interesting, but that's about it. Number two, I thought Georgia just dominated the line of scrimmage. Dominated. I think at times you and I could have almost run for first down. Stetson Bennett had all day to throw, which he was phenomenal. We'll get to him in a minute. But that is where you wonder in a game like this.
There you go from Justin.
Yeah, we could have some fun with that tonight. But yeah, that's a spot where that I'm thinking before the game, like, can TCU hang with Georgia in the trenches? And it did not. I mean, Georgia was rushing 3-4 guys a lot of the night,
and freshmen too. A lot of freshmen there for Georgia.
I mean, it was just a mismatch there.
Yeah, it was. Up front, Georgia was able to get home with 3 and 4 when they needed to, or at least get pressure over there with 3 and 4 guys when they needed to. And then when they did bring the blitz, I mean, it was almost unfair at times. But just literally the surge that you would see from Georgia's offensive line going against TCU's defensive front, that was one thing that TCU did so well against Michigan, against other teams this year. They came flying down in gaps and were able to push people back and things like that. And Georgia just had them reeling, going on their heels the entire time, Chris. So it was something to behold. And I thought, I knew I thought going into it, I was like, well, TCU's got this magic and all this kind of stuff. But when Holly Rowe comes over to Kirby Smart literally seconds before the game and says, what is the key to this game? And he gives a one-word answer, aggression. It reminded me of Mr. T. What's your prediction?
Some aggression going on in the floor behind me. I apologize.
He said, when Mr. T said on Rocky, they said, what's your prediction? He said, it's pain. That's what it reminded me of.
The other thing, goodness, Oreo, Todd Monken was tremendous tonight.
Yeah, Todd Monken had it dialed in. There was every bit of the playbook was wide open. He could have run whatever he wanted to, but Stetson Bennett's legs, he only ran the ball for 3 times, but every time just seemingly untouched, 2 touchdowns, and literally everything Todd Monken dialed up turned to gold. Ladd McConkey had a huge night. Brock Bowers finished just yards short of being only the second receiver, tight end / receiver in Georgia history of 1,000 yards receiving. Only Terrence Edwards is the only one that's ever done that in program history. And Brock Bowers goes over the 900 mark tonight. Tavares King is second on that with 950 yards. So, there was a lot of accolades to go around tonight. And by the way, Stetson Bennett became only the 8th quarterback in SEC history tonight to surpass the 4,000-yard mark, which is truly remarkable.
Well,
in a season, in a single season.
You know my thoughts on the Heisman. I feel like they should wait until after the college football playoff has been played and finished because you get some of the better matchups. I mean, teams go all year without playing teams that can compete with them. And you get a disproportionate amount of matchups in major bowl games and the playoff of good on good. And if you revote the Heisman today, does Stetson Bennett get it?
I don't know. I'm not sure if he gets it or not. I mean, he'd have a better argument, I think, than he did before, for sure, based off the kind of that clutch gene. Listen, to your point, the Ohio State moment, that down by 6, 2 minutes to go, coming back, that was a Heisman moment if there was anything. This was more, like I said, more of a coronation, a farewell send-off tonight. Donovan is kind of chapped over here because he said that people are comparing the UGA to the 2019 LSU team. And he says that, I don't see how you can say one was worse than the other. They're both 15-0.
Defense was just okay. And I get
they're both
their
15-0,
but yeah.
So, I think these are just great football teams, period. And, now what it comes down to is, okay, you got to look at the Georgia's returning roughly, I've seen out there, in terms of the starters, anywhere between, I think the numbers between 75 to 80% of the guys. And man alive, it is going to be very, very interesting with the schedule they have next year. Tennessee is at Tennessee is kind of the biggest game out there, but they're returning so many people on that defense that it's going to be interesting to see if now they can push for a third one. But regardless, Chris, with winning 2 in a row, we talked about it kind of coming into this game. Kirby Smart, 47 years old, has now won 2 national championships, played for a third one. He's done himself a lot of favors in terms of where he is going to rank and what he can do going forward, because he's already a legend in Athens, what he did as a player, and now winning 1 national title, now 2 back-to-back. He joined Saban with the 2011, 2012 Alabama team, and then, of course, Nebraska before that with Tommy Frazier going back-to-back. So very, very – and then USC with Reggie Bush and Pete Carroll and all those guys. So just a unbelievable achievement. And now the question is, is this can this continue for Georgia? How big of the loss of Stetson Bennett is it going to be, Chris? You pointed out he could have, if the Heisman voting was delayed, he might could win it. Now Georgia's got to replace a quarterback. But man, you look at everywhere you turn tonight, they were talking about freshman, sophomore, a young Georgia team that just accomplished back-to-back national championships.
Yeah, I had this written down too. Kirby Smart is 73-10 with the last 5 years. That's crazy.
Yeah, take out that first year that he went 8-5 and beat this TCU program in the Liberty Bowl in his first year, and now he's beat him again in a national championship game. And like you said, that record looks pretty good. Rusty says Beck would have won this game. It's hard to argue with that. Carson Beck came in and was slinging it around, looked pretty good. Carson
or the guitarist, either one. I mean, that's how good Georgia was.
Yeah, it was crazy. And over there, then they bring in Branson Robinson, a true freshman running back, and he looks like the second coming of Nick Chubb. I mean, with his legs, they're, so wide over there and running. I mean, it's crazy to see what this team is going to be. And then one of the more interesting things of the night, Chris, I think may have been David Pollock and Nick Saban's exchanges with each other over on the at halftime, where David Pollock is literally talking right past Saban to Reese Davis and saying Georgia is really taking hold of college football. They own college football right now. And Saban, you could just see him dying inside a little bit over there. So an interesting dynamic there on the desk.
Yeah, I missed that when I was taking the dog out for a walk to inevitably calm him down, which worked so well. Rusty, you're right, the musician. Beck was not a guitarist. Or was he? I've forgotten already. The LSU comp was brought up. Yeah. LSU outscored teams by 26.5 a game that year. And probably against a tougher schedule, Georgia wound up, let's see.
LSU had to beat Alabama. Let's just say it. They had to beat Alabama. Georgia didn't have to face Alabama this year. I don't care what people say. Alabama, you saw what they did to the Kansas State team that beat this TCU team as well in the Big 12 championship game. And, Bryce Young, Will Anderson, yeah, they lost to Tennessee. But, man, that Alabama team was still really talented, as was the one that Joe Burrow and that team eviscerated. And they eviscerated the Georgia program in the SEC championship that year. So that's really, if you go back and look at it, LSU, Chris, is probably the reason to blame for this offense that Georgia has now, because it was that game that Kirby Smart said, okay, we can't just win with dominant defense anymore. We've got to get more explosive offensively. And that's what ended up, he went out and got, Todd Monken and the rest is history.
Yeah, I think Donovan's right. I think LSU did have a tougher schedule, but just for whatever, if my quick math is right, LSU outscored teams by 26.5. Georgia ended up 26.9. So just a little bit more scoring margin, but I mean, who cares? I mean, look, LSU's offense that year was the best maybe we've ever seen. Mm-hmm. Its defense was okay. It was not this Georgia defense, which, to be fair, Georgia's defense was not last year's Georgia defense. But I mean, we're sort of splitting hairs. We're talking elite teams, and LSU that had no staying power, right? I mean, it just it kind of came and went, and you're having a coaching change 3 years later. With Georgia, that is decidedly in a different spot.
No, Rusty, they couldn't kick their. Oh my goodness, he's talking about Ohio State. He's kicking themselves tonight, for sure. I mean, it's it's interesting to see how all these teams are compared, Chris. But here's the thing: I got a question for you. Which team do you think is a more complete team? Last year's Georgia team or this year's Georgia team?
Last year's, I think.
Really, even with the offense being much better this year.
You couldn't score on them. It didn't matter. I mean, this year's Georgia team was a little bit wonky at times in the secondary. And again, we've got the spotlight on them because when you've got a team that's at elite, you're going to look for stuff. But that defense last year, all the kids, look at the draft. 15 guys to the draft, man.
I agree, but the lion's share of those were defensive guys. And I'm telling you right now that this offense for Georgia is vastly underrated in terms of like this offense for Georgia this year was every bit as dominant as the defense for Georgia was last year, in my opinion, in terms of being able to do whatever they want. Georgia finishes the year averaging. This is going to put their point average. They came in averaging 39 points a game. Now they've scored 65. They're going to average well over 40 something points a game this year and be one of the top scoring offenses in the country. And like I said, Stetson Bennett had 4,000 yards passing, over 4,000 yards passing this year. I think the explosivity, the Brock Bowers, the Darnell Washington, the offensive line, I think this is, in my opinion, this is the more complete team because the defense wasn't as historic, but it was still really, really good for 13 out of the 15 games. They just had actually 13 and a half of the 15 games. The second half LSU and then the game against Ohio State, they struggled, but every other game they absolutely dominated.
Okay, final stat, they 41.1 a game, 38.6 last year. So it's, 2.5 points difference. I just think the defense last year was so unmovable. I mean, when you cannot score on another team, I'm a little more biased if offense and defense are, how do I say this? If everything is the same in terms of scoring margin, I'm generally going to go with the team that's got the better defense. Because if you can't score on somebody, you can't win.
Yeah,
again, we are judging a beauty contest here. This is Miss Universe, and you're picking among the contestants. But if you're asking me, that's why.
Now, until when it comes down to it, Georgia is going to be a heavy favorite next year because of I think Vegas is going to have them as the favorite. And, if you look at way too early odds, I think they're going to be the favorite. The question is, do they get the quarterback play? Because they're going to have 7, 8, 9 guys who, if not were starters, were greatly contributing on that defense. It's going to be Kirby Smart, what he has set up. And plus bringing in Dominic Lovett and Ra Thomas, two of the top wide receivers in the SEC on offense to help whoever the quarterback's going to be. My goodness, it's just like, where does it stop when it comes to Georgia's reign of dominance here? Because that schedule, like I said, other than going to Tennessee, Georgia should be heavily favored in every game. But that Alabama and LSU, I think LSU was one of the more impressive teams, especially coming through bowl seasons. I mean, they shellacked a team like the same way Georgia just did, 63-7 against a Purdue team. LSU, with having their first year under Brian Kelly, being there, going to the SEC West, winning the SEC West, going to the SEC championship, and the recruiting that Brian Kelly's been able to do. Chris, you could realistically see Georgia and LSU again against each other in the SEC championship next year.
Yeah, I have a feeling Alabama will be in the mix, and Tennessee has gotten better quickly. I mean, it's going to be very interesting. But how many guys does Georgia get drafted this time around? Because they had 15 a year ago.
Keely Ringo, even though he got beat at times this year, all the projections say Keely Ringo and Jalen Carter will be first-round draft picks.
Sure.
Chris Smith goes
left tackle.
Left tackle is supposed to be the first tackle taken, which is Broderick Jones. So that's 3 first-rounders there. Darnell Washington, people are saying because of how freaky he is, he could be a potential first-rounder. And then Chris Smith at safety is projected to be a late second round to anywhere between late second to high fourth round pick. So they've got those guys there. And then really Cedric Von Prawn, he could elect to go pro, the center. But who knows if he's gonna leave or not. And then Warren McClendon has a decision to make at right tackle as well. But they, a lot of the weapons that they have, and then what they've added in the transfer portal coming back. So it's going to be interesting to see.
Justin Bennett gets picked too.
Yeah, Justin, are you talking about USC as in out west USC or South Carolina? I don't know which one you're talking about. I guess you're
Too
talking.
early either way in my
Yeah,
mind. But back to the draft thing. So if you had to put a number on it right now, how many does Georgia get picked in the draft this year?
I'd have to go out and see who ends up all coming out, but I know that number is at least going to be. I don't know that it gets into double digits this year because I don't know if there's enough guys. And it also depends on if Stetson Bennett gets drafted or if he goes as an undrafted free agent. I would think
I
anywhere, but
think he's getting drafted.
yeah,
How can you not draft that kid at this point? I mean, he could be having him as a backup somewhere. The point that the Athletic was making, I think it was them a week ago, was that he can learn offenses so quickly. There's such a premium in the NFL for having a guy, and you saw what happened with the Rams this year. They bring in a quarterback. 4 days later, he's making a start and leading him to a win. The perception is that Bennett's that kind of guy,
yeah.
and there's a lot of value in that.
Yeah, I mean, look at Chase Daniel, who's held a clipboard for what 13, 14 years from
Right.
Missouri, and he's made a good living. So it's possible. Doug Flutie played a long time. That similar type style there with Stetson Bennett, and Doug Flutie, how they played the game. So it's gonna be interesting. Rusty says SF can make anybody a star. San Francisco, Kyle Shanahan out there, what he's doing with Brock Purdy. For sure. So there's a lot that there's a place for him, I'm sure. But still, I don't know if somebody will use draft capital on him or if they'll just say, hey, we can get him as a undrafted free agent. So here's the thing. I would say I would put the over under at 8.5 on players drafted this year for Georgia, just because I don't think there's that many coming out. Bye bye football. Hello darkness says this super chat there from Justin, but then we'll put Russell up here.
That made me laugh. Okay, so what was it the 01 Miami team that had a record for guys picked or whatever in the draft? I'm just wondering what the tally winds up for last year's Georgia team.
Oh yeah,
and how close they make it.
Guys that played, I mean, because Brock Bowers is going to count in that the next year beyond that, and even if Warren McClendon doesn't come out and save it, I mean, there's going to end up being,
you're going to have kids on that team last year that didn't even play.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Played 15 snaps that get drafted.
2-3 years from now, you're going to have guys from that. It could end up being literally dozens, Chris. Like it could be four upwards of 40 guys from that team get drafted before it's all said.
If you want to talk dynasty, to me, a dynasty is not just something that like you have a great year and it's best team ever. It's can you stack them back to back or back to back to back like Saban did? And if you want to go a step further, you could argue that part of it is how good are your guys really? In other words, it's just a system thing where you play fast and somebody can't stop it. But when you're putting that many kids in the league and first, second, third round draft picks, whatever you want to go is your bar. And the number of teams that can do what these last two Georgia teams have done, I'm guessing. I mean, it's Georgia and some of Saban's teams and that Miami team. We're talking about a really elite list of teams that of programs, maybe not teams. Programs is a better way to say it, that have done what they have done the last 2 or 3 seasons, especially if you start counting elite professional talent into the equation.
Yeah, no doubt. I think even you got to give a little bit of kudos to, I know they've fallen off now, but Dabo Swinney and what they did at Clemson, because they won 2 national titles. They played for 2 national titles. Other than that, they've had, Deshaun Watson, all those guys come through and had a ton of talent before all the NIL stuff got going and everything. But, Justin asked this question, is Kirby the best coach in the SEC now over Saban?
I can't go there yet because it's 6-2 or
I think the question there is, are you talking about in the annals of history, or are you talking about in the moment? In the moment, I would say that Kirby's on the heap and everybody's trying to swing up at him. That's an obvious statement, but just I know what have you done for me lately scenario, but Nick Saban's the greatest of all time. I mean, there's no question about that. There's no question.
It's a fascinating discussion.
This playoff was like waiting for a great finale at New Year's fireworks show and having the whole thing with a dud. No doubt, Russell.
This
doubt.
finale was like my dad, his father, they'd shoot fireworks off every year. They had a tennis court and they would shoot them. And the first one year, somebody throws a bottle rocket and it lands in the paper bag with all the other fireworks, and they all go off at once. That was tonight.
And Justin, in the current environment, it's definitely Kirby. Obviously, one back to back. But here's why. Let me tell you the why. It's because Kirby and Saban. Now, listen, Alabama and Georgia are still utilizing NIL just like everybody else is, and things like that. But they're able to convince these 4 and 5 star prospects who have legitimate aspirations and have a legitimate hope of making the NFL by saying, okay, we're going to develop you. Here's our track record on how many guys we put in the NFL, and we will help you get the NIL money once with our collective, once you start proving things on the field. Not everyone's going to buy into that. A lot of guys are going to want the money up front and all that kind of stuff with how things are going. You see guys going to programs like Miami and Texas still who, haven't won in forever. And it's because they're able to get NIL money up front. Georgia, Alabama, Ohio State, they're all doing it a little bit differently, saying, come here. If you prove it, if you get the exposure, like Georgia and Ohio State played in front of 35 million people. I think it was that their number, the number rating that it ended up gaining on New Year's Eve. And that kind of brings your exposure. Stetson Bennett has made over $2 million in NIL this year because of what he's done. Brock Bowers is going to think of the number that Brock Bowers is going to make next year. I mean, it's unbelievable. Brock Bowers highest pick ever for a tight end next year. Could he, I don't know. Kyle Pitts went number 4 to the Falcons, which is a absolute joke for how they've used Kyle Pitts. But Brock Bowers would have to go pretty high because I think he went number 4, number 8. I can't remember over there for the Falcons. But it's gonna be.
You're gonna have a. Go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, I just can't remember where Pitts went, but Brock Bowers is going to go high.
You're going to have a very interesting greatest tight end of all time discussion coming up soon in the league. It's him. I mean, Ozzie Newsome is going to be on that list because he was a Hall of Famer that played at Alabama, although Alabama ran the wishbone then and didn't throw it a lot, but it is what it is. I've got one other thing I want to throw at you on the dynasty thing that we went back to, but quickly. Betting 11 to win 10 stinks. With BROTHROW, you bet 10 to win 10. It lets you bet on all 50 states because it's not the house. Bettors have a fair chance at winning. It is the only sports platform that doesn't take a cut of every bet. You don't have to deposit money into a BROTHROW account. No deposits, no minimum bets. No need to connect your bank account. Bettors pay each other directly. It's a hassle-free sign-up process that lets you get in the action in seconds. Go to brothrow.com/SE14. And once you get there, join our private group and we'll let you in and have some fun there. Okay. We talked about Miami and that team that had all the draft picks.
Yeah.
Miami was Miami in the Big East at the time?
Yeah, they were in the Big East. They were the big monster in the Big East.
So that doesn't mean that you can't be the best team of all time just because you played in the Big East. But what I was getting at next is you look at the coaches in this league, man. Mm-hmm. I know Jimbo Fisher is a punching bag, but he's won a national title. We talked about Saban. You got Brian Kelly.
Jimbo's cured that, though. He brought in another punching bag to take the punches for him. So now,
I should have never said that because now we'll go on a rabbit trail if we're not careful. But point is, it's one thing to pull off a dynasty. It's another thing to do it in this league with these coaches week in and week out. I mean, there's not a – I mean, we can crack Jimbo jokes, but there's not an awful head coach in this league.
No, even, like I said, Jimbo Fisher knows more football than everybody collectively in this. He's forgotten more football than everybody in this collective chat has ever known. I mean, seriously, he's, national championship winning coach, offensive guru from, albeit another era, right? His offense needs to evolve, but seriously, like, as you pointed out, there's really good head coaches up and down the league. I mean, my goodness, look at the late Mike Leach here, who was
Yep.
at Mississippi State. He had an
Lane
influence.
Kiffin,
He had an
Josh
influence
Heupel.
on this game. He had an influence on this game on tonight.
Mhm.
He was at Sonny Dykes, a direct disciple of Mike Leach from his time at Texas Tech and learning over there. So, there was a lot of there's a lot of good coaches in the SEC, and that's what makes it really, really hard to win in the SEC. In fact, here's how hard it is to win in the SEC, Chris. Georgia's back-to-back national champions, but they're not back-to-back SEC champions. Think
Right.
about that.
Right.
I mean, that's a big statement in itself. But the other thing I got to thinking about is, what this reminds me of? This reminds me of the 2012 Alabama Georgia SEC championship, which really turned out to be the national championship because Alabama went and just bludgeoned Notre Dame in the BCS championship.
Mhm.
Whoever would have won that game. And Rusty brought it up earlier. Ohio State has to be kicking themselves because Ohio State would have boat raced this TCU team as well, in my opinion. So,
how do we rank the final 5 or 6? I think you go.
oh, somebody else said
Georgia.
Alabama should have been in the playoff, and I mean, you can't argue that now. I mean,
I think you could argue Alabama at 2. You could argue Ohio State at 2. You could argue Tennessee at 2.
I mean, I think you have to put. I think you have to
You have to
put.
put TCU there just because.
No. I think you have to put Ohio State as the second best team in the country, and then I would probably put. I'd probably put Alabama. I'd probably put Alabama at 3, and maybe
But
Tennessee.
you get an argument from Tennessee because
Maybe
Tennessee
Tennessee at 4. And the only reason I say that is
won the
because,
game, and
yeah, you got your whole body of work to take into play. So it's somewhere in there. I mean, I think Tennessee, definitely has hit that mark where they're the one team that I think Georgia has to look at the 2023 schedule right now, with that being in Knoxville, and say, ooh, that's a game we gotta circle just because of how prolific that offense is under Heupel, and Joe Milton has a howitzer attached to the right side of his body. So
here's a good one.
Sonny Dykes, yeah.
Well, here's my question: Do you do that, or you take the Lincoln Riley approach and say, "No thanks. I'll go play against somebody else week in and week out and see if we can get there at the end."
Well, here's the thing that Sonny Dykes has already done that Lincoln Riley's not done. Lincoln Riley's never made it to the big game. Lincoln Riley's made it to the playoff, but he's got just bludgeoned in the playoff every time he's
Lincoln
been in
Riley
there.
may not ever be able to have a defense good enough to get him there.
A team takes on your personality, and this isn't a bash Lincoln Riley thing, but some people are disciplined enough and intense enough and have the demeanor that makes their team be good defensively. I mean, look at Sonny Dykes. I know they got boat race tonight, but all year long they played good enough defense to win, even when their offense wasn't great. And that's a direct compliment of Sonny Dykes and his ability to adapt. Lincoln Riley has proven time and time again that he cares not about how his defense plays. He's just going to try to outscore people. So, that's the way it is over there.
Well, that might be good to get you into the playoff. It doesn't have a lot of staying power once you get there. And that's the one thing I thought about TCU tonight. TCU was giving up like 26.5 points. And I know it's the Big 12. It's an offensive league, so you can probably, and plus they play one more conference game. So you can probably, in context, say that's like giving up, maybe 23, 24 in the SEC. But then and I don't mean this as a slight, but then you're Tennessee's defense. And
Yeah, I
that's
mean,
just not going to be good enough to win at this level. No, look, that's probably good enough to be top 5. But when we're talking about winning the whole thing, that's when the hill gets a lot tougher to climb. If you can't be a little better than that on the defensive side of the ball, that was probably the last thing I thought before we went into kickoff tonight. It's just like, I don't know that defensively they're good enough to stay in this game. And that's exactly how it played out.
it kind of makes me think of an old joke my grandpa used to tell me. You said the last thing that went through your mind. You know, the last thing that goes through a bug's mind when he hits a windshield? His hind end.
Right now.
So that's kind of what happened to TCU. They just got stopped cold. I mean, it was absolute just massacre. At one point, I was tweeting out the game, and I said Georgia 31, Hawaii 7, because it made me think. It made me think of that Sugar Bowl in 2008, where Georgia just obliterated the then Rainbow Warriors. Now, here's another thing.
Maybe think of Vandy and Hawaii in week 1 if we want to go full circle on the SEC and Hawaii.
Vandy keeps making their way back in the chat. I'm telling you, Vandy, Clark Lee, the Fighting Clark Lees, making progress. Real question for you. How big is which one do you think is a bigger gap? Do you think there's a bigger gap between Georgia and Tennessee in the East, or Tennessee and the next team down in the East? And people in the chat, you can answer as well. Bigger gap between Georgia and Tennessee right now in the East, or Tennessee and the next team?
Part of the issue is I don't know who the next team is right now.
Well, it would have to be Kentucky. And the only reason I would say that is because of who they brought in.
It might be South Carolina right now, and that's sort of a trick question. But
South Carolina, I don't know.
I think it's Georgia, Tennessee.
Yeah, I think there's a huge gap in the East. Even with Tennessee being much improved, and I think that is a scary game for Georgia next year. I'm not going to lie, but yeah, it's still a big gap there, and there's a lot to overcome. It just feels like, Chris, it feels like when you were watching those Alabama teams in the early 2010s, where you were just waiting for the next shoe to drop in terms of something to go bad for the opposing team in those games, because that's just how dominant those teams were.
Yeah, well, and Saban's teams would take a game that, you think if you play this on mid-October, because sometimes Saban's teams wouldn't have that A game, but then you get on a stage like this and they just would beat your brains in more than anybody imagined. Kirby's kind of got that thing going for him at times too.
Yeah, Blake would appreciate this. This reminded me, and any wrestling fans out here would understand, when it reminded me of when Kurt Angle brought John Cena out for his first ever appearance on television. He said, "What makes you think you can compete with me?" And John Cena said, "Ruthless aggression." That is exactly what happened when Holly Rowe talked to Kirby Smart before the game. She said, "What makes you think you can win back to back?" And he said one word. He said aggression, and he said it like he knew it was about to happen. That was very telling for me, and it was just a absolute abuse from the beginning.
Here we go. Actually, it was one question down on what I meant to get. Someone asked if TCU. Here we go. We've had a bunch coming in. We'll hit this one next. The questions keep popping up, and I keep clicking the wrong one. Do you think TCU belonged in the playoff? I still think that's the right call. And they did beat Michigan, which was unbeaten. Again, I think the Big 12 schedule is tough. You don't have just an awful team in the Big 12 right now, not just a pushover. One extra conference game. Yeah, sure. I don't. Maybe you can say Tennessee would have done better, Alabama would have done better, but TCU took care of business most of the year.
What I'm going to enjoy about the 12-team playoff, and I'm not necessarily a huge proponent of it, but what I'm going to enjoy about the 12-team playoff, Chris, is that there's going to be less room for people to be SEC deniers just because they're like, oh, well, we don't need too many SEC teams in, because there's no way. And Greg Sankey told everybody this. He said, that's fine. Go ahead and expand the playoffs, but there's going to be 4 or 5 SEC teams in the playoff every year. And there will be, and it'll be interesting.
The old lack of Big 12 defense joke pops up again. That's pretty funny, though.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
There was another one in here that I meant to get to. I think it was this one.
Which has a better chance of having South Carolina beating Tennessee again, or Georgia winning by a smaller margin than 17 at Tennessee or neutral site? There's your answer. I think that Georgia will be a 2-touchdown favorite going into that game at Knoxville next year, because Joe Milton, as talented as he is, will not be Hendon Hooker. They don't have Cedric Tillman. They don't have Jalen Hyatt. It's going to be interesting to see what happens there. And just like Kirby Smart has had to prove, you said, can you do it back to back? Josh Heupel's got to prove, can he be successful like that back to back? It's not Josh Heupel's been someone who's went places and built stuff quickly, and then he's moved on. He's never been somebody that's sustained a program for a period of time, and it's going to be incumbent upon him to prove he can do so.
Well, when you posed the question about gap between Georgia and Tennessee to everybody else, I wasn't thinking just about this year either. I'm thinking kind of in general.
Yeah.
So there's 2 ways to answer that question. Florida's the team that still interests me, because Florida's the team that people thought most of the year. He had a big build there in terms of culture and other things. And
can we correct the record real quick? Can we correct the record?
Sure.
Who said? I said Florida would go 5-7 before the year. I missed it by 1 game. They went 6-7. So, I just don't believe in Florida, and I think Billy Napier's a great man, but I don't think that was the right hire for Florida. But continue.
Well, you may be proven right. I'm just telling you that's what I heard was perception.
Yeah.
In the league. And I like Billy Napier. You and I have a different opinion on him. You're not the only one that doubts him, that thinks it might not work. I'm not ready to throw it out after 2 years, but the way they ended the season did concern me a little bit.
Oh, yeah. No, that's a program in disarray. And guess what? They have to go out to Salt Lake City, Utah, for the first game of the year next year. And guess who just said they're coming back? Cameron Rising coming back for another year at quarterback for Utah. So they could how hot is the water going to be over there for Billy Napier down there in Gainesville if they go out to Salt Lake City and get boat raced?
By the way, I just noted I had my good mic connected all night, so that would have been nice to know.
Hey, I didn't hit you. Sounded good to me. The melodious tones of Chris Lee were fine over there.
Well, what else?
Anybody got? Yeah, I mean, anybody got any questions? We're going to wrap it up here in just a couple minutes. But anybody got anything before we hop off here? We got about 5 minutes or so. So if you got a question, Donovan says, "Oh, you got it. You beat me to it."
Well, again, what are we talking about? Are we talking about this very moment, or what we think that looks like going forward? Because I'm not sure there's going to be a lot of difference in the 3 of them the next 2 to 3 years. Yeah, Georgia's the team on top right now. You have to give the nod to Georgia, but the way LSU performed this year, our buddy Brett at Pick Six Previews had LSU last in the West, and he's pretty good at his job. That was an indictment of LSU having 63 scholarship players, and the West being a meat grinder. And you saw what happened. Now, I do think that I think if you play it all over again, LSU doesn't get to the title game, but it happened, and you give LSU credit for that. And you saw the way LSU entered in the bowl game. You saw it playing 3 quarterbacks that most teams would kill to have any one of those guys. You talked about the talent on that receiving room. The guys they get in their front seven, and for that matter, their secondary. He's got the discipline. I'm not going to say all the way cleaned up, but he's getting there.
There's not a
and
huge
he's
gap.
going to have talent.
There's not a huge gap between Georgia, Alabama, and LSU. Listen, I know that Georgia just dominated LSU this year, but it was year one. I'm just telling you, I think that you throw those teams in there together and they play a round robin type series. I think Georgia right now, with the talent they have, if everything stayed the same, Georgia would probably win maybe more, the majority of them right now, but Alabama and LSU would win their share as well. I'm just telling you, there's that much talent going around, and LSU and Alabama are both recruiting. Listen, Nick Saban literally just brought in his best recruiting class ever with this cycle. So they're not going away anytime soon. And I really think that LSU is going to be very good next year as well. The West is definitely the better side right now. So,
well, here's the other thing that makes what Georgia did impressive. I think college football, they're slowly getting to be more parity, because a lot of years you say, okay, there's 4 teams, they stand above everybody else, and then when you get to the playoffs, it's a boat race. Well, you had 2 really good games in the semis this year, and you had 2 teams sitting on the outside that could kind of raise their hand and say, maybe we belonged. And maybe with the way TCU played tonight, Alabama and Tennessee fans are probably making that argument a little stronger. It doesn't matter, but just for kicks, there's that. Look, you had Kansas State beat TCU. I think the 12-team playoff is going to be a lot more interesting than people have given it credit for being. And with the portal, with NIL, and I hope eventually they will get these things more on where everybody's on even footing. But in the meantime, what it's done is it's had the effect of taking an Alabama team, a program that looked invincible, and here we are.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, I'm distracted by this comment. The SEC the SEC East is way better.
No?
Are you for real right now? That from top to bottom, the SEC West is a better league. I mean, in terms of the totality of it, Georgia stands alone in the East, I believe. But top to bottom, I mean, the West is a gauntlet over there. I mean, look at Mississippi State, even finished at 9-4 and had this Georgia team at Mississippi State. They were playing them close at halftime over there. So, I think that's not true. But
you have teams too. You have Auburn sitting out there that won a national title, a decade ago, or less. And I mean, you have Florida's won one in the last 15 years.
Yeah,
you have a lot of other good programs out there just sitting there that could pop back up into top heap relevancy too.
I like this comment here. Bama is OC dependent team is what G White 713 says. It's going to be interesting. We know Bill O'Brien's probably going back to the New England Patriots, is what rumors are being circulated. And there's a name being floated out there that he could be without a job here soon. Cliff Kingsbury could be out of Arizona. And would Nick Saban bring in a innovative play caller like Cliff Kingsbury to be the offensive coordinator at Alabama? He certainly would bring some excitement and kind of a wide open style of offense that Saban likes to run. But there is another thought of that. When you look at the recruiting class that Alabama's brought in this year, they've brought in 2 of the better running backs in the country, Justice Haynes, who is a Georgia legacy, and some really good offensive linemen. There's some rumblings out there that Saban is not happy with the kind of the lack of physical edge that Alabama has had over the last couple of years, and he wants to get back to being a little bit more physical on offense, a la a Georgia program. So, we'll see which direction he ends up going. I think that hire will be very, very interesting.
Well, look, their offensive line has dropped off a little bit. When you're sitting there every year and you're looking at Alabama, and it's just like, okay, whoever their first round or whoever their left tackle is going to be a first rounder most years. And usually a center that's top of the heap that, they've had guards picked in the first. I mean, it's usually tackle to tackle NFL guys. And the thing I said before the season, when you look up at them and their tackles, Tyler Steen, who was Vandy's left tackle and not a very good one at that. I started to wonder, like, wait a minute, all this greatest team ever stuff, if Tyler Steen is your left tackle, he doesn't exactly stack up against some of the names you've had. There might be something to that.
Yeah, and they brought in ridiculous talent in this class. Alabama has, but here's the thing: like I said, Georgia is still immensely talented. Will be immensely talented next year. Will be the favorites to win the national championship again. Even though Stetson Bennett is moving on, and finally out of eligibility after 20 years, it seems at Georgia there. But man alive. It's gonna be a fun year, and guys, make sure that you are subscribed to Southeastern 14 here. Hit the subscribe button; it's free, and hit the like button because we're going to be bringing you all kinds of off-season rankings, spring practice reports, year in review, assessments of all the different programs. Chris, we got a lot of content coming up during the off season,
and we've decided we're going to do football live streams on Monday night.
Yep.
8:30 Eastern.
No,
excuse me, 8:30 Central.
8:30 Central. Yep. So we'll be doing those at 9:30 Eastern, 8:30 Central every Monday night. So be tuned in, and like I said, all the better reason to subscribe.
And we've got live streams for hoops coming up. I think Blake and I are going to do those at 8 Central on Thursday night. So we'll be doing 2 live streams for the foreseeable future. When baseball comes, we're going to do those too. I don't know if we will start just replacing basketball with baseball on Thursday night or how we'll do it, but we'll figure it out. And by the way, on football, if you like the draft, I've got a little something up my sleeve. I'm not going to throw it out there yet because I don't want to promise before I can do it. But I think if you like the draft, I've got an idea that I think is going to be very popular, and hopefully we can pull that off on live stream too. I dropped that to you in a text tonight. And
no, I think that's going to be great. I'm excited about it, and Justin, it was an amazing season of coverage here on Southeastern 14. This community is what makes it great. We appreciate you guys being a part of it, thank you so much for tuning in. And Chris, now it's time to now that I'm here at Eastern time, I'm into Tuesday now. It's time to wind up and go to bed.
Yeah. Quick things. We've got predictions for Tuesday's basketball games. I think we put those up this morning. We've got predictions for Wednesday's games that we'll probably put up Tuesday morning. We did SEC basketball power rankings this morning. We did a recap of this weekend's basketball games. We'll have some more football content coming up this week. And again, we'll do, I think, our first SEC basketball live stream on Thursday, not to mention some reactions to Tuesday's and Wednesday's games the morning after those are played. So if you're here for hoops, we're about to really crank that up too. And again, we're not forgetting football. It's going to be football stuff every week too.
Yeah, and as we depart here, I'd just like to say, thoughts and prayers for Eric Ainge out there, because his timeline is going to be walloped over here with all the comments he made with the Stetson Bennett hate coming into it. So everybody enjoy Twitter. It's going to be a lot of fun. Be responsible with your tweets, and don't say anything you would regret. Don't say anything I wouldn't say. Go look at my timeline, and that'd be a judgment of it. So, but guys, we appreciate you tuning in. Chris, I mean, we're good to wrap this one. We good?
Yeah, man, we've had a fun year for football, guys. Seeing a lot of the same names in here. And again, if you're new, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss stuff, and hit the like button. That helps us out. We were around 300 subscribers on New Year's Day, and we'll be over 6,000, I think, in the next 2 to 3 weeks, maybe sooner. So it's been quite a ride. Again, if you like our football stuff, you're gonna love our hoop stuff too. But anyway, hey Blaine, thank you for joining us this year. I mean, I say that this isn't goodbye because we're going to be doing every Monday night. But you were a phenomenal addition.
Hey, I'm
this.
happy to be part of the team. Rusty says good night, Sir Chris. So you are knighted once again for sure. Over
Rusty's
there.
got a good memory. Yeah,
Absolutely. But no, I'm happy to be a part of the team, and going to be a lot of coverage going forward, guys. Like Chris said, I'm going to go ahead and sign us off here. But I appreciate everybody tuning in. For my pal, my co-host here, Chris Lee, I'm Blayne Gilmer, and we'll catch you guys next time on the next live stream and videos and all the good stuff here on Southeastern 14.